Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Punuktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavaditam Astu Mavidishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us. May our study be full of vigor and enthusiasm. May it be efficient. And may we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. This, of course, is the traditional prayer for students and teachers alike, so that these teachings are not just discourses, not just talks delivered from a platform, but they're there to get some useful, practical value. How to live life in such a way that the mind doesn't unnecessarily get disturbed, that harmony reigns. In our pursuit of happiness, how can we gain this? How can we change the conditions of our normal environment? Of course, we can accept it and then take it from there, not wishing to change it. So there are a number of different approaches to what we call life. One approach will be that we accept that there's a causal change that goes all the way back. There's a causality, there's a determinism. And so we have no free will. We have no room to maneuver. Things are just as they are. But then what does that say about morality or the possibility of changing? It doesn't bring this into play. There's another school of thought that says that we have entirely free will, a kind of libertine or libertarian point of view that says that there is only free will, there's no constraint. So these are two opposite approaches, and somewhere in the middle is the truth. Of course, there are certain constraints that we have. None of us can suddenly fly off. None of us can choose necessarily the country in which we are born. We are constrained by our biological anatomies. We are constrained in how we walk. We are constrained to walk upright. We are constrained by our biological development. We are constrained often by the conditioning of parental attitudes. Sometimes society constrains us as well. So in a sense, we are not free. But in another sense, we can determine what is right or wrong. We can develop some moral values, and we can adhere to those moral values. We can make evaluations and decisions. We can gather information. So there is a limited free will. It's a bit like an animal being tethered to a post, not knowing that it is tethered. So it is the freedom to move all over the field. And yet, of course, there are certain conditions and constraints. And those constraints are useful to it. It is not against one. These restrictions, these limiting factors, limiting adjuncts have a function. And they can be used as instruments, as tools. But the subject tonight is the rewards of perseverance, and what has this got to do with it? It is because unless these particular issues and attitudes are resolved, we don't know what we are persevering toward and what the scope of the rewards will be. Now, most religions, organized religions, structured religions will have some area of reward and punishment. And we use this psychologically anyway when we bring children up. We give them short-term motivation in the form of a stick and a carrot. Stick metaphorically speaking, of course. So we can give them a reward for good behavior. We can give them a punishment for bad behavior. But really, long-term, it doesn't work. Long-term, a different approach will have to be made. These are simply guidelines to enable a child to make an internal realization. I will develop something for myself. I'll be independent. So when it comes to things like traditions and so on, I'll have the capacity and the individuality to challenge them. And if they make sense, I can adopt them. If they don't make sense, then I'll try to find what is the reason, what is the purpose. So in discussing the rewards of perseverance, there needs to be a question asked, is there some purpose in life? Some purpose in any endeavor? And if we find out a purpose, if we find out that there is a direction, then we can take all our energy, we can combine it, and we can channel it in that one direction, and we'll get a reward from it. One thing we know, that whatever effort you put in, you get out. It's simply an energetic equation. It's simply to do with entropy. You can't get out something that you never put in. Whatever you put in is what you get out. So Patanjali in his Patanjali Yoga Sutras tells us that success is speedy for the highly energetic, is mediocre, of course, for those who put mediocre effort in. So if the goal is worthwhile, then it'll inspire us then to be self-motivated. We don't require the carrot and the stick. We don't require fear or reward. We are self-motivated because we truly understand the importance of the goal in the form of a purpose. Why are we here and where are we going? The Upanishads discuss this fully. It is all they discuss, that there is a basic essence in us that is required to be discovered. That when we make an inquiry, what is life in general? There's a famous series of lectures compiled in a book by the great physicist and scientist Schrödinger. Erwin Schrödinger came to Dublin, lived in Dublin, and explored, even as a physicist, this intellectual question that is so fundamental to all of us: what is life? And it is still an outstanding question that academics are discussing. Because if you think that this life is just physical and material, then you'll say life is inexplicable, but we know that it is just organic material. That means that the human entity is nothing more than atomic structures with no purpose in mind whatsoever. We live, we're born, we die, and if you ask, what is my purpose? They'll manufacture a purpose, but then at the end of it, does nothing. But this doesn't answer the questions of what is life as we see it now, as we know it now. How is it that we are different? How is it that we have different skills and talents? How is it that there is some kind of germ within us that becomes manufactured into individual, completely separate individual entities with completely different, seemingly different destinies, and yet the constraint being there, all with the body, all with the mind, all with the capacity to think, all the capacity to feel. The subconscious mind is one of those areas that has not really been measured. We can scientifically measure all the physical things in the so-called external world. And if we ask a physicalist what you mean by life, he'll say, whatever the senses provide, we take for granted that the objective world that we see is all that there is and nothing more. But did you explore that area, subtle area of the mind? This qualia, this subjective understanding that only you know. Yeah, you can't say whether a person dreamt or not. That person's dream is their own. They may say it, but you have no proof of it. The only real proof of anything comes from you. Direct proof comes from you. And that is why in spiritual life, the real thrust towards some kind of unfolding in spiritual life, what we might characterize as progress, is not to do with ritual, is not to do with tradition, is not to do with any of these things. It is to do with your own experience. And any of the competent testimony that we find, such as in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, or such as in the biblical texts of the prophets and the New Testament accounts, such as we find in the Quran, such as we find in any scripture that you find, it is a record of personal experience somewhere, a personal encounter, a direct one-on-one experience, experiential proof. And yet we can't experience what they experienced without doing what they did. To what extent you do it, again, you have free will. It's entirely up to you. It is quite evident that there are rewards of perseverance in any endeavor. If you give something up, you won't get what you set out to get. You won't get the reward of it. So perseverance is a given. Now, Swami Vivekananda gives a threefold formula for all the qualities necessary in spiritual life. He puts it as 3 P's conveniently in English. He says purity, patience, and perseverance. Now, this is true in any endeavor, because the first thing that we require to achieve anything will be resolve. But to get the resolve, we have to understand the meaning or the principles of what we're trying to achieve. It has to be logical. It has to be rewarding. We have to be enthused about it. There has to be a get up and go feeling about it. There has to be high motivation and connection with it. There has to be great, great enjoyment in it. Enjoyment and enthusiasm go together. But in the beginning, of course, we might see an end result which is by no means what we began with or the process that we're using to get it. Let's take, for example, somebody who wants to run a marathon. They see somebody who is lean and fit and enthused about running, and that person says one day, "Come and run with me." And he runs maybe 4 kilometers. And the person who's running with him is in very poor condition, not being used to running. So after 4 kilometers, huffing and puffing, feeling exhausted, feeling a burning sensation in the lungs as if they would die, and half collapsing at the end. And the one who's been trained in it, who's been used to doing it every day, not just 4 kilometers, but maybe 10, but who let the friend off and say, "Do 4 only." No difficulty, no labored breathing. He goes in, has some water, sits down, and immediately transfers his energy to another activity straight away without a second thought. How did it happen? It happened through systematic training, regular training, so that strength is being built up more and more and more. It's very easy to become physically strong. It just requires patient, systematic training, building on it. It's not so easy to develop the will, to develop concentration, to develop the mind, the internal faculty. But the principle is the same. You still have to do systematic practice in it. What we call meditation. Meditation being twofold: eyes open, eyes closed. Eyes closed is what we have just done this evening in the way of guided meditation. It is a personal meeting, a personal encounter with your own inner being. It is a one-on-one experiential meeting at the deepest possible level. But eyes open means the minute you wake up, presumably your eyes are open at that point, you open your eyes. Maybe the person who normally does it away on holiday, but we presume you yourself open the eyes, and then you go about your business. And unless you're able to mold the mind in such a way, then sitting down for formal meditation will be difficult, if not impossible. dealing with situations in your so-called real life and dealing with them in a practical way so that the mind does not get disturbed in any way. That is, that your reactions are under control, that there has been systematic training as if you were running 4 kilometers, but you're doing it with the mind. So the practice of concentration, concentrating in activities, involving systematic regulation of the day called time management, involving being mindful in all activities, being enthusiastic about all activities, not engaging in stress to do with what should be done or could be done in the future and is not being done, worries and concerns in that direction, and misery and doubt and fear and all the regrets of the past moment. The poets say that it'll all be arranged in the last moment, that the last moment is the most important formative moment of your life. This is just a poetic way of putting it, because every second, every moment is the last moment of your life. Every moment is the beginning of the next moment. And the next moment that was a future becomes the present moment. Forget about the question why that's in the past. Why is a past tense question, and we have to draw a line under that. It's gone, we can't change it, but we can change the future. And so the reason why we give these philosophy classes and why we try to summarize as best as possible and make commentaries on what the ancient people who made these experiments and got this experiential proof for themselves subjectively, what are they saying? Is not just tradition. It's the fact that they said they make a statement, an axiom. The axiom could go such as that this self is immobile, it's changeless. This self is all there is. Brahman is all there is. And this Atman is one with Brahman. And this whole world is nothing more than a series of appearances that come before our eyes and our ears and our sense of smell and touch and taste, all our senses. But the reality is it's not what it seems. This is all their experience and is also logical. When we examine the logic for ourselves, we find it passes currency not only in the purity of mind that is required to come to this conclusion, but the method of purification that we call yoga. And lastly, that it is logical. It makes sense. We can analyze it and see the sense of it. With all of these components, we can endorse there's a principle that is worth pursuing. And if we pursue it with an element of consistent perseverance, then we will get the rewards. Initially, of course, in any endeavor, you do it to get the rewards. But spiritual life is entirely different. Because at some point you realize it's not the rewards which are to be gotten here or hereafter, but the reward itself is a realization not of something in the future, but something which is absolutely here and now. It is absolutely attainable and accessible now. Not in a post-mortem condition, because that's a kind of determinism that goes too far. God making the world from nothing with a destiny that will only be rescued in post-mortem condition, beginning off with laboring about sin, that the whole idea is, the whole of life is just a reproduction of an initial loss of knowledge from an ancient ancestor, the first of humankind. And you're carrying that with you. It's carrying on by genetic inheritance. And that genetic inheritance is leading you to a position where you can only be saved by some other entity, not yourself. But Vedanta doesn't take this position. It says, the only one that can rescue you is you. That's all. And so even after elucidating all the chapters All the teachings in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita, the Lord Krishna is telling Arjuna, now you have learned everything. Now please do as you want. Offering him an avenue of free will, because it is with that element of free will that we are able to determine whether we will and how consistently we will persevere in our endeavor or not. So the rewards speak for themselves. We have not much to say about the rewards. But what is perseverance? And more importantly, what stops us from persevering? There are a number of examples, wonderful examples of perseverance. We begin with Ramakrishna's example. There are two farmers, and they're in a position whereby they are desperately, or their fields are desperately in need of water. One has something like a persistent nature, and the other one really listens to other people and says, that's okay, I've done what I have to do, enough is enough, let me leave it. I have before me the actual story being told, and because the details of it are so beautiful. So it goes like this, that there was a drought in a certain part of the country and two farmers were there. And they began to cut large channels to bring water from dammed areas to their fields. Now, don't forget, just as there is a reward in your endeavor, there's also the opposite of it, a deleterious effect if you do not pursue something. So what is the consequence for a farmer who has to feed his family when there's no water and there's a drought? If he doesn't do the job, what will happen to his family? Will they not starve? That's the consequence. But often, when we fail to persevere in endeavor, it's because we have lost sight of our goal. We have lost sight of the outcome. And we have to keep that alive continuously. The Vedanta philosophy tells us we are suffering really from only one malady, the forgetfulness of our own divine nature. And that requires constant reminding, because if that doesn't happen, then the world comes in and encroaches on us. World meaning the small world of concerns that upsets our equilibrium, that make us react in outrageous ways which we are no doubt ashamed of. And even if they're not expressed either in the tongue, they are internal. There are physiologists that say it's better to express these things because, they all build up as a heart attack. But the difficulty with that is that if you express it in the way that some psychologists, for example, recommend, instead of being angry and doing damage to other people, go and dig a hole in the garden. Well, it's better to punch a pillow or dig a hole than to punch your neighbor, no doubt. But the damage is still there because any exhibit of anger, every time anger raises its head and comes up and possesses you, in a sense of madness, is formulating the habit level in a negative way. How do habits get formed? We start with some actions, some routines, maybe some ideas to start with, and then we continue that, and that eventually becomes our habit. The habit eventually becomes our personality, and the personality becomes our actions, and so it goes on like this. So there's a vicious cycle in which we can get engaged if we don't control the mind and the preventions of the mind. Not by suppression or repression, not at all. That doesn't work. No psychology on earth, past or present, ancient or modern, will ever advocate pushing something down. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It'll come up with a vengeance and be destructive. But we are destroying our own subtle area of the subconscious mind, about which we don't know the extent. There's no scientific measurement about it, but we know it's there. This habit level provides us with memories, individual minds, individual memories, all of these, but these are just reflections. Just as the full moon is beautiful, but it doesn't have a light of its own. And the most reflective areas on the moon are actually because it's made from glass. That is silica. When it has if there's an impact of a meteorite on the surface of the moon, it then displays the impact, sprays the grains everywhere. And so all the silica which is there lies on the surface and starts sparkling like a mirror, shining, the shining moon. It's all an illusion because it's the sun which is reflecting. It's the sun's rays that are bouncing off the moon and being received by the eye. So we have to understand what is the difficulty when we don't persevere and what is the merit when we do. And so the time came for the one worker to take his bath because the work is over, the time of day, it's now getting dark and so on and so forth. And so his wife sent the daughter with oil and so on. The father said to the girl, "It's already late. Rub your body with oil and take your bath. Go away," thundered the farmer angrily. "I have too much to do now." It was past midday and the farmer was still at work in his field, and he didn't even think of anything else, let alone his bath. Then his wife came out also. Daughter was sent. Now the wife is coming up. "Why haven't you taken your bath? The food is getting cold." You overdo everything. We can even hear echoes in our own life of people saying this to us, and we listen. We become the slaves to some other voice. "You can finish the rest of the work tomorrow, even today after dinner." And the farmer scolded her furiously and ran at her, spade in his hand, crying, "What? Have you no sense? There's no rain. You don't understand. There's no rain. The crops are dying. What will the children eat? And you'll all starve to death. I have taken a vow." See? A vow, a resolve. This is where it starts. "I have taken a vow not to think of bath and food today before I bring water to my field." And so the wife saw his state of mind and ran away in fear. And through a whole day's back-breaking labor, the farmer managed by evening to connect his field with the river. And after that, what do you think his condition of mind was? He was able to relax. He was able to sit down, watch the water flowing into his field with the murmuring sound, how beautifully he puts it. And his mind was filled with peace and joy. He went home, called his wife and said to her, "Now give me some oil, prepare me whatever it is, a pipe and the food and everything else, and I can take my rest happily." Job done. Now, in contrast to that, the other farmer has a different state of mind. So, other person told the same. It isn't necessary to overdo things, and the farmer didn't protest much. So he put his spade aside and said to his wife, "Well, I'll go home since you asked me to." And that man never succeeded in irrigating his field. So in this way, this is an example of somebody who has persistence, perseverance, a certain level of dedication, a certain level of determination, these qualities, and you see the rewards come to that person. Now, the story doesn't continue and tell us whether the other person's family starved, but we assume they did. Because he did the minimum. And when you do the minimum, when the minimum becomes a regular habit, it becomes a maximum. So with all the effort you can muster, if you feel that the goal is worthwhile, and if you feel that weighing up the circumstances are such that when you don't do it, it's deleterious to the unconscious mind, the habit level. When you do it, it has its rewards, things flow. Now, the other example in this, of course, is that in spiritual life, we're not doing something to get something necessarily. A better way of looking at it is, all we're doing is removing the obstacles. When we dig a trench in the example of these two farmers, what are they doing? They're not systematically taking water from the river and putting it onto the field. And eventually, of course, that river will dry up if they're not careful, if they don't create a reservoir. But the beauty about water is it always takes the shortest route. It finds its own way around. And the obstacles that you put there, it'll get rounded. But if the obstacle is tough enough, solid enough, like a dam wall, it goes nowhere. You have to open the floodgates. And so construction of all these is necessary in water management. But the water is flowing by itself. We long know that water and God's grace are synonymous, are used, allegorically. They're used, one standing for the other, one can represent the other, because both is a kind of flow. We don't have to ask in meditation for God's grace. It's flowing already as thought, the capacity to thought, and it's there. And then with that, we can channel it in any way we like the farmer is doing in his fields. So we have to persevere at what? At removing obstacles. Find out what your obstacles are and systematically remove them and leave the rest to divine grace to flow through. That's the idea. And in both cases, can you see, there's always somebody who'll tell you, no, don't do this, do that. Take the easy way out. There's always somebody who'll tell us this. And if somebody is not telling us this, very often we're telling it to ourselves. We're making a convincing argument internally to ourselves. Spiritual life, I'll wait till old age. I'll wait till tomorrow. Meditation, I'll do it tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. And don't forget, every moment is the last moment. What are we doing with it? So there has to be some good reason for us to persevere. And the good reason, the scripture will give us many, many good reasons for it. But the primary reason really is that at the moment, we are struggling to get out of a painful condition, be it physical, be it psychological, be it emotional. We are caught up in a cycle that it seems very difficult to get out of. We are told that our nature is fully divine and perfect and full and free. This is what we are told. And all the Upanishads will give convincing arguments. And you yourself can be convinced about it intellectually. But the emotions, what happens to them? They're easily led astray. We can easily be convinced. Let's delay this. Perseverance is required. Now, these three qualities of purity and patience and perseverance are necessary even in secular activities, even in material gain. Because unless we have a resolve, unless we have a clarity of purpose to start with, unless our goal is absolutely crystal clear, then we won't be able to meet it. So we have to have a clear idea where we are going. Now, fortunately for us, Swami Vivekananda gives us this beautiful, well-known and well-worn passage that each soul is potentially divine. And the goal is to manifest this from within. So he uses the language of goal. The language that anybody making any secular endeavor will make. There's a goal in mind. So he's saying, yes, there's a goal. Yes, there's a purpose. Yes, there's a direction. What is that? To manifest this divinity within, because each soul is potentially divine. I mentioned this many years ago to somebody. He says, no, each soul is divine. Why do you say potentially? It's because we don't know it. Each seed is potentially a tree. Each small oak seed is an oak tree standing tall and firm, giving shade to everybody. But in its condition, in its subtle condition, we don't know that. So it has to manifest fully. That is the same as saying water has to manifest in the field. It has to flow. It has to be realized. So each soul is potentially divine. You are that. You have to be convinced of that, because most people don't think that. Most people think, I am so-and-so. My name is this, and my parental name was that, and my caste is this, and my social status is that, and my wealth is this, and my geographical location is that. And I have many associations. I have friends, I have family, I have children, and I have a certain physical appearance, and I have certain physical maladies. And from time to time, these need to be attended to. And I have a jumping mind, and that's me. So when you ask somebody, who are you? They won't come out right and say it. Because the truth is, I am that immortal entity. But what will they say? They'll mention their job. They'll mention their name. They'll mention many other things, but they won't say, who am I? This question is an outstanding question. So each soul is potentially divine, and the goal is to manifest this from within, not from outside. And what will be the result? What will be the reward? You will control the whole of nature, internal and external. You'll be able to control the whole of the external life that was previously beyond your control. All limitations gone. And you'll be able to control the internal aspect, what we call antakarana, the internal instrument of the mind, including that subtle area of the unconscious mind. So vast is it. That you'll be able to control. And how will you do it? Well, you'll do it by yoga. You'll do it by understanding the philosophical principles, making a determination of what is real and what is not. You'll do it by working in such a way that there's no egocentricity about it, and working in such a way that you will have no disturbance of the mind. And you'll understand that there is an aspect, the highest ideal in the whole of your human intellectual ideal or way of thinking or formation of what is the highest, most perfected ideal. The Christian argument from St. Ambrose and others will be that the highest, absolute, perfect thing that we can ever imagine, that is God. And love for that then. In other words, taking all our emotion and channeling it in that sweet direction, and also gaining equilibrium of mind through concentration. These are the various ways. Under the one heading, yoga. That's what yoga means. Yoga meaning to unite, either not only as a process, but also as a mystic union, as an effect, eventually. This oneness. Then Swami Vivekananda, of course, goes on famously saying that what is secondary to that, what is simply an expression, a human expression, which can be so many and varied in the form of traditions, books, temples, I'm changing the language slightly, books, temples, rituals, churches, all of these things that people think of as religion are actually secondary details. They do not have any fundamental importance. They have an expression, and the expression is necessary in the beginning stages. But they are secondary details and have absolutely no meaning if you do not take the central idea seriously. Understanding this, there's every reason, therefore, to persevere. And there are some examples of perseverance other than this. The great Scottish king, Robert the Bruce, in his despondency and defeat, took refuge in a cave. He was about to give up. And then he saw a great teacher in the form of a spider. He took it as a teacher. He saw a spider trying to construct a web. And every time he got somewhere, he fell and had to start again and make a new thread, a new web, and so on and so forth. Never gave up, continuously did it. Some time ago, earlier this year, somebody sent a wonderful video of a polar bear, I think it was, climbing up a steep precipice. And it was very icy and therefore very slippery, trying to get to its mother. The mother made it. The mother waited patiently at the top, anxious about the cub. And every time the cub crept up, it would slide down to the bottom again. It would start again, slide down, start again, slide down. All the time, sliding and climbing until it got there. Unless you pick yourself up and start again, not worrying about what happened in the past, you won't get anywhere. Giving up won't give you the reward, but progressively picking up from where you left off, regardless of how you feel, or regardless of whether you feel you slipped, or whether your practice maybe is now erratic, or whether your practice needs revision, or whether your practice needs renewal. And so the renewal comes on a daily basis. There's a wonderful Christian hymn. It says, "Lord, for tomorrow and its needs, I do not pray. Keep me stainless just for today. Don't worry about tomorrow. And yesterday's gone, but just for today. That's all you require." And then the following day, another renewal. So what this means, therefore, is it takes a number of qualities. It takes strength, but strength is something you already have. You are stronger than you think you are. Imagine now, if your life is under threat, imagine the amount of strength that you have. A feeble man has the capacity to lift a huge weight under stress and rescue a life. There are many examples of it. In the Chandogya Upanishad, we have the story of Satyakama. Satyakama came to his teacher. He didn't know what his family background was. And the teacher, because he honestly stated it, accepted him and he said only a true Brahmin, that is, a knower of Brahman, would have said such a thing. We take Brahman as a caste thing. But he's saying, no, obviously you have come into this world with this thirst for understanding of the highest knowledge. And so he takes him on as a student. And as it happens very often, gives him instruction. He says, here are some cows. And your job is to take them off. And when they have increased considerably, something like 100-fold or something, then you come back. And so he went off. Now, can you imagine how long it would have taken him? So he says, he's separated out 400 lean, weak cows. Somebody's expecting spiritual enlightenment. This is something different. So imagine the patience and persistence necessary. I mentioned earlier, by the way, before I continue, how every endeavor requires this purity, even if it's in the language of clarity about your goal. And then you have to have patience that nature will unfold it for you. And part of that patience is also the principle of understanding that every thought has its condensed version in the future for you. And so by continuing, putting your intention out with the confidence that nature has the capacity to supply it, you'll get it. Anyway, going on with Satyakama. So he's given something like 400 lean, weak cows and said, go with these. And while taking them away, he said, don't return without these 400 becoming 1,000. So he lived how long? A number of years doing this. You can calculate how long it takes for 400 to be 1,000. Anyway, when it became 1,000, and these are not just 1,000 lean cows, they're now strong and healthy, what happens? The teaching comes from within him. And so in various forms, the bull spoke to him. Well, we are now, 1,000, it's time to go back. And go back to the teacher's house. And then he taught 1/4 of Brahman. And like this, fire taught another 1/4 of Brahman. Like this, a bird taught another 1/4 of Brahman. A swan taught another 1/4 of Brahman, like that. By the time he got to the teacher, his face shone like a knower of Brahman. And then his teacher taught him the rest, the transcendent aspect of this. So can you see now what perseverance is required, what patience is required, and what purity is required? These 3 things are required. And then we get the rewards from it, the due rewards. So let us now just see what is the opposite of perseverance and what takes us away. And we have some flavor of it in the story of the farmers in the fields. Resolve is required. The principles are required so that we understand what is the end that we're trying to get to. And then a what if plan. A plan is necessary. What if I lose enthusiasm? What will I do? Do I have a support somewhere? Do I have a teacher somewhere? Do I have a holy name I can repeat somewhere? Do I have a holy place I can go to? Do I have a system that is clearer than just the general terms, general methods of the yoga? Do I have this in great detail? Do I know what japa is? Do I know how to use it? Do I know how to update my spiritual life on a regular basis? What happens if I get physically unable to do something, to practice? What then? Do I have a fallback position? This is also required. And then repetition. Repetition of spiritual practice is necessary. In any endeavor, it's necessary. In learning music, it's necessary. You can't say, I'll learn music in one day. I'll make a rehearsal in one day. I'll learn it in one go. There are people lacking patience who are playing their guitar in their heads, but not actually using their hands, and they don't get anywhere, of course. So constant practice, constant repetition. What is knowledge? Knowledge is the cessation of the necessity to repeat. When you no longer have to repeat, you don't have, you know it. You no longer have to repeat your own name. You know it. You don't with every announcement of your name. Every introduction you make, I am so-and-so, I am so-and-so. You don't deplete your knowledge of your name. With every check you write, you don't diminish your name and say, I have to write another 1,000 checks in order to restore my name. The fact is, you know your name and you don't have to repeat it. When we no longer have to repeat something, then knowledge is there. And knowledge becomes untouchable. Knowledge becomes immovable. Sri Ramakrishna gives an example. I gave a thought out today that was based on it, inspired by it, pretty much it. That you see, it's like, you can imagine now, a blacksmith hammering a piece of malleable steel. And no doubt you've either seen it firsthand or you've seen pictures of it, where at the end of it, it goes various shades of orange and red, depending on its temperature, its heat. And at its most hot, you can tap it, you can bang it, it will bend. Steel will bend. And then if it cools, it hardens in that shape. But how do you do it? You have a hammer in your one hand, you have the steel, and you have to have a base to hit it on. This is called an anvil. The anvil is never touched. The anvil receives the blows, but it remains solid and still, and repeated blows are there. So knowledge, someone who has this knowledge, a knower, will be unaffected by all the so-called vicissitudes of life, will be stable and solid, come what may. It doesn't matter if wind or rain or snow or sun falls. It doesn't matter if there is hot or cold, if there's pain or pleasure, if there's praise or blame. These pairs of opposites, completely immune to them, like water running off a duck's back. Imagine the equilibrium of mind if you have this. So rehearsal is necessary. Constant repetition is necessary. And one of the easiest things to repeat is God's name in the form of mantra. Mantra, protecting thought, lovingly put with great feeling and understanding of its meaning, can be repeated anytime, any place, anywhere. It can be repeated 24 hours of the day. It is your most potent tool. The potency is such when given by a guru or teacher. But any protecting thought will do. And a few weeks ago, we discussed the impact in the way of a pilgrim, a Russian pilgrim trying to discover the meaning of the Greek Orthodox or the Russian Orthodox Christian simple prayer. And although the words are there, we think we know the meaning. Actually, it is much deeper than that. When it enters into the very pulse, enters into the very heart, enters in as constant practice, constant repetition, practicing the presence of God with it. What a wonderful thing. So we have to practice this removal of obstacles in whatever way we possibly can. We have to develop our own repeated formula. We have to take on every possible help that we can. But above all, we have to not be discouraged by setbacks. We have to understand that all progress is not linear. All progress has a linear trend, no doubt. But progress will be a little up, a little down, a little up, a little down. But as long as the central trend is on the way up, as long as the graph is giving you an upward trend, that's the main thing. Do it progressively. Do it easily. Glide across the border of mundane material life to sublime spiritual life, knowing that every piece of matter in the universe is spirit. It's a wonderful, wonderful offering that Vedanta has. So with these few words for the last hour, I take my leave of you. Have a happy new year. And just a few announcements before we leave. So tomorrow, of course, we have the Lisbon study group. I don't think I mentioned it on the weekly schedule, but that was an unfortunate omission, but it will still be there. And then on Saturday morning, we have more of a discussion on yoga from the physical or health point of view. And then in the afternoon, we have the Life of Holy Mother. And then Sunday we have the Vedanta series question answer. And then Sunday evening we have Gospel of Ramakrishna. But in between, of course, 1st of January, Friday, is Kalpataru Day. So there'll be a special talk on that from 11 o'clock on Friday morning. I hope you'll join me then, where we explore the great impact that occurred at Kashipur Garden House, where described as the Kalpataru occasion, the wish-fulfilling tree, where Sri Ramakrishna bestows his blessing on all. Very inspiring event, and devotees are particularly mark this day out in a special way. So, Om Shanti, 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 peace, peace, peace be unto all.